Nice to be here with everybody tonight. Let's settle in. We'll do our slow chanting of the three refuges as we often do. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize in the talk later tonight in our discussion is just how to access joy. And interestingly, sitting together and singing or chanting together is a pretty effective way to experience joy. But of course, it takes commitment, like we have to really show up. Because, I mean, there's joy that we have when we have really nice sense experience. That's one kind of joy. But the spiritual joy or rapture really arises when the mind, the heart, the body, all aspects of who or what we are all in alignment. So there isn't like one part of the mind opposing another part of the mind. And when the whole mind, body, heart is in alignment with the present moment, then there's that, free flow, that absence of friction, absence of resistance. And it subjectively, it feels like waves of joy, lightness, buoyancy, because mostly our experience as a human being is feeling oppressed and fixed and bound and hard and heavy. But when everything comes together, like chanting together with a group we feel relatively safe with, and I know it can be refuges and chanting in the Pali language can be a little strange at first, but really we're just chanting what we find of real value in our life, that we can take refuge in being awake. That's what Buddha means. Being open, being real with the actuality of our lives. We can take refuge in the way it is, the conditions that are coming and going, and the underlying nature of all of our experience, which is that it can't be grasped because it's changing. It's not really personal. Even our thoughts and emotions, they're, in our ordinary sense, they're ours, but they're not personal. You didn't order them, did you? Our thoughts, emotions. And we can take refuge in Sangha, this capacity we see in ourselves in moments, at least, see it in other people in moments. This capacity to really act, live out of this intimacy of Buddha, being awake to the way it is, and just the nimbleness and creativity of that. So let's go ahead and do our chant. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. And if you need to, adjusting the posture so you feel relatively upright, can be relatively still in the posture, soft and relaxed, as if the heart, the sensitivity, we really belong here right in the middle of our lives. Establishing mindfulness to the fore, which simply means that we're recognizing that this experience is being known. For example, the experience of sitting now. This is an experience that's being known or felt. It's like this. So using the experience of the body sitting, the experience of the body breathing, to recognize that the present moment is being known. And directly sensing what it is to be mindfully aware of sitting, of breathing in or breathing out, or mindfully aware of whatever's predominant in the moment. And experiment with this sustaining, keeping the present moment in mind. And being interested in what allows this present moment awareness to be sustained and what causes the present moment awareness to be lost. This is a wise investigation. What kind of interest allows present moment awareness to be sustained? What is it that interrupts it? How can the mind begin again, skillfully? For example, in a skillful way, the mind can choose to be interested in breathing in, choose to be interested in breathing out, to recognize that breathing in is an experience being known and felt here and now. Breathing out is an experience that's being known. Any frustration, any doubt, any pride is an experience being known here and now. And as many times as we need to during the sit tonight, come back to the very beginning where you're remembering, you're taking the time to remember, to discern what it is to be present or mindfully aware. Using the experience of the body sitting, or more specifically the movement of the breath. And it's only when the mind is present that this wise interest, this wise investigation can illuminate the causes, like how the mind participates in stress, causes for stress, and how the mind can participate in putting things down, releasing, letting go. A simple example is we'll notice some painful sensations in the body, and just being aware in the present moment of this painful sensation, and notice how the mind reacts and the body tightens up around the pain. And right there in vivid present moment awareness, we see the causes for more stress and suffering. And then when the mind understands with wisdom and kindness, we can also observe that unnecessary reaction passing away, softening, and see the potential for release. So this is really the essence of investigation, how it is that the mind is contributing to stress, how it is that the mind can contribute to release. And the mind is naturally interested in this, but it might initially take some prompting. And one of the things that wisdom will discern is how skillful it is to put everything down for a while, and how stressful it is for the mind to keep going back to its worries, its regrets, its thoughts about the past or future. So we can choose to be really interested in the natural phenomena of breathing in and breathing out, specifically to help the mind put everything else down. Because if the attention is simply tracking the ordinary breath coming in, well, it can't be tracking our worries, our hopes, our fears, our obsessions. So they'll be dropped. So this is a very useful strategic use of interest. To be interested in the meditation object, breathing in and breathing out, as a skillful means for putting everything else down. Clearly tracking each inhalation, each exhalation. And as the mind and body become more settled, of course, the way the body's breathing will also shift and become more refined, more subtle. So just notice the natural evolution of the breath as things settle. Allowing the breath to become as refined and subtle as the quality of the mind and body. As if at this time nothing matters except to be aware of breathing in, aware of breathing out. And of course, if the attention gets drawn somewhere, just acknowledge that. Make peace with the distraction, and begin again. And as we're doing this, we can come in touch with the awakening factor of energy, this capacity to really persist because we know it matters, we know it's wholesome or good. So the heart really persists. It doesn't give up easily. And when it does, it's willing to begin again. Remember, it's okay to relax. It really helps. We're not forcing anything. Keeping the present moment in mind, using the breath or whatever meditation object you like. And if it feels appropriate now, less dependence on this exclusive object of being aware of breathing in, be aware of breathing out, and notice the experience of the whole body sitting as you breathe in, aware of the whole body sitting as you breathe out. And see if you can notice this as a more wonderful relaxation. Breathing in this more inclusive awareness of the body. Breathing out this inclusive awareness of the body, just letting the body be. So the same continuity of present moment awareness, but now with a more general object, the totality of the body sitting. Nothing needs to be left out. Keeping the present moment in mind as you breathe in. Keeping the present moment in mind as we breathe out. And use this totality of the sitting body as a support for this continuity of awareness. Breathing in, calming the whole body. Breathing out, letting the body calm, settle. Sensing a growing, pervading calm with each inhalation and each exhalation, just as best you can. And this willingness to be all in, not holding back. Breathing in, keeping the bodily calm in mind as you breathe in. Breathing out, keeping bodily calm in mind. Even if it's faint. So instead of paying attention to the discomfort, we're paying attention to the sense of calm in the body. It's a real training. It matters what we pay attention to. Pervading calm, let it grow, widen, deepen. Ultimately, we want the whole body to be touched by this sense of calm. And as the body and mind heal in this way, you might notice a lightness, a sense of joy, lightness of heart, like a beautiful smile in the heart, shining, radiating. And it can be very subtle at first. So the fifth instruction from the mindfulness of breathing is breathing in, experiencing joy. Breathing out, experiencing joy. So we're training ourselves to keep this inner joy in mind as we breathe in. And then just do our best to keep this inner joy in mind as we breathe out. It's really important to learn how to keep joy in mind, even if it's faint or subtle. And we're not talking theoretical, but the actual sense of joy, connecting, sustaining through one inhalation. And then again, just do your best to sustain this awareness through one exhalation. And it's okay if you need some support, just repeat the word joy as you're breathing in. And then again, repeat the word as you breathe out. And that can be a helpful support at times. Remember, we're not forcing, just interested in joy in whatever form it might be available. And so for the last minute or two, just resolving to be interested in whatever joy is present now. Lightness of heart, this wholeness or unification here in the present moment. We'll take a little time and adjust our posture as we need so we're comfortable. I'm putting a link in the chat for those of you online. As I talk about rapture later, you can save that document. I'll send it out in the email later before week 7 next week. So next week we'll have small groups, and we're working our way through the awakening factors. And remember this fourth foundation that we're studying this fall, it's really the place in mindfulness practice where we're not just learning how to be aware, to connect and see clearly the body, or to see the mind, to get a sense of how the mind is. It's really this fourth foundation of mindfulness is really about how to participate in balancing the mind by learning how we can pay attention in ways that starve or weaken the hindrances, and how we can be aware in ways that feed and strengthen these wholesome awakening factors of mindfulness. And then the three energizing: investigation, energy, and joy. And the three calming or tranquilizing factors: tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And it's, once the hindrances, those habits of mind that hinder the continuity of present moment awareness, when they've been abandoned, which we talked about in the first half of the course, how do we abandon the hindrances as opposed to endlessly tormented by wanting, by aversion, ill will, not wanting, dullness, sleepiness, restlessness and worry, or doubt? That's a pretty good description for how it is for most of us most of the time, right? We're kind of pushed around by the establishment in our minds, the habits in our minds of these hindrances. And there are different ways to talk about the difficult qualities of mind, the 10 defilements, the 3 poisons, right? So the Buddha talked about it, but they're just overlapping maps. just different expressions of delusion or ignorance, basically. So once we've abandoned the hindrances, that's a pretty exalted state or unusual, extraordinary state of mind, a mind that isn't being hindered, weighed down by these hindering qualities, these oppressive qualities of mind. And then it's almost like we have to learn a whole new vocabulary, because mostly what we're doing in meditation and daily life is just like I was an elementary classroom teacher. Some of you, I'm imagining, or you raised kids. It's a little bit like that's our mind. We've got to keep our eye on these guys over here, and that person just doesn't want to do any work, and this person's really hurting, and they need a lot of support, and it's endless. Like the image the Buddha used, as some of you know, this simile of the cow herder trying to get a big group of cows down a narrow path when the crops are ripe on both sides of the path, and the farmers are not going to like it if the cattle tramps through the ripe crops, because it's going to ruin the field. So they're wildly tapping the cows this way and that way to keep the cows on the narrow path. And that's how it is when we're managing our hindrances. But we develop our skill, we're persistent, we listen to the instructions, we learn how to starve the hindrances so that they fade away. And then there are moments, right? And this was, if you weren't part of the small groups last week, one of the questions I asked, and you can reflect on it right now, do I know the mind, this mind, absent of the hindrances? Do I know that experience? Am I familiar? Because we definitely, I'm assuming, are familiar with the experience of my mind overrun by the hindrances. Remember the really provocative image that's used in the tradition of those little vines that start to grow in the big trees and slowly, over decades, encompass the entire tree. The vines drop their roots to the ground, and they have a way of surrounding the branches and main trunk of the original tree until there's nothing to be seen of the original tree anymore. Like the banyan trees some of you have seen in Asia, or even Hawaii, there's a couple really big ones. So, do we know that experience when the hindrances are gone? And then it's like all that we've learned in our Dharma practice right now isn't helpful, because it was mostly about how not to get lost or relate improperly to the hindrances. But now there aren't any hindrances. The mind is free of the hindrances. And now we have a whole new vocabulary, like, okay, let me begin to sense what remains when the mind is free of the hindrances. Or there's present moment awareness. There's this investigative part of the mind that is interested, like wisdom, it's interested in causes, like how does this beautiful mind continue, and how does it weaken and fall back into its old habits, right? So that's investigation, is sort of like, what's an appropriate thing to pay attention to now? What should I pay attention to? How should I pay attention? And it's kind of checking out cause and effect, basically. You can't do that without mindfulness, but with mindfulness, present moment awareness, because keeping the present moment in mind, then investigation really sees the results. Like if I pay attention to this, what happens? Have you noticed, like you've got some calm in your meditation, and then there's something moving. It could be like, oh yeah, I gotta plan that out. Or it could be some sound or some movement in the room or whatever it is. And it's like, that's investigation. It's like, I wonder what happened. I wonder if it's okay if I think that through. You know? And investigations are, just connecting the dots. Okay, don't do that. That doesn't help. So investigation is really applying what it knows about what's helpful and not helpful, and learning more about what's helpful and not helpful. It's developing its understanding of what's helpful and not helpful, what's skillful and unskillful. And that next quality of energy, persistence, is to whatever degree the mind senses how useful it is to do this investigation, like it really helps. It really helps because the more I'm interested in what's sustaining and deepening the concentration and what's weakening it, I'm able to sustain it better. So energy is like all in. I'll persist because I see it has value, right? So a lot of times we think of energy as, I got to make energy. I mean, I have to make effort. But it's discovering that and keeping in mind, you know what, it really matters, so I'm going to stick with it. Just like some of you are gardeners, or I know Tim and others maybe are musicians, or whatever your craft or your interest might be. And hopefully you've learned that if I just persist, good things happen. If I stick with it. Like as long as what we're sticking with is productive, and it's investigation that figures out what's helpful and not helpful, right? And then the energy, the steadfastness, the persistence is like, okay, wisdom, investigation is really seeing this is helpful, so I'm going to keep hitting that note. I'm going to keep doing, relating in this way, paying attention in this way, because I've seen. And investigation doesn't go away. It's still refining, like, what is actually skillful about that and how to be even more skillful and how to tease out what isn't helpful. So these are the energizing, they're active qualities, right? And in a way, if you do the mindfulness investigation, application, like that persistence, I'm all in, this is helpful. And there are a lot of impulses to do other things because we're programmed. The mind is programmed in so many different ways, tugged in so many different ways, but we persist because there's some sense that right now it's beneficial and it's beneficial down the road. And when we persist enough, it's like, I have this great quote. I'm not even sure who it's from. I didn't write down where I got this. Maybe it's me. And it's talking about rapture. At first, each moment of effort meets resistance, right? Because initially we say, I think this is helpful, but all our habit energies are not used to persisting in this way, so there's a lot of pushback. So at first, each moment of effort meets resistance, the inertia of habit. But after continuous persistence, inertia has burnt off, and commitment, showing up, has immediate payoff. Connecting and sustaining, see the wholesome results directly. It's not theoretical. So there's part of, sometimes in the tradition, Buddhist tradition, they call this launching energy. It takes this sort of capacity or willingness to burn away the inertia. Like my mind isn't used to persisting in this way, but I'm really going to persist. I mean, hopefully you notice that even tonight, every time you sit. The mind wants to do what it normally does. Think about this, think about that, worry, plan, doubt. Should I really be spending my time meditating like this? Like if you're going to meditate, don't think about whether you should be meditating. But we do that a lot. It'd be better to go do what you want to do. But when we meditate, we want to remember, oh yeah, mindfulness, that is awareness of the present moment. It's keeping the present moment in mind, remembering this is being known, whether you're using a particular meditation anchor or whatever is predominant moment by moment, right? And then because there's some continuity of present moment awareness, there's a capacity to investigate what is actually skillful and unskillful, because the results of being skillful are seen only in the present moment, and the results of being unskillful, relating unskillfully, are only seen in the present moment. So investigation can happen only in the present moment. And then the heart, that ardent heart, when it sees the value of this investigation, it can persist. Oh, I'm really learning something about my mind. This is going to have long-term positive implications. I'm going to persist. Of course, the mind doesn't say that, but that's that movement of persistence, of energy, effort. It arises because the payoff of investigation is beginning to be intuited, like how much there is to learn, how valuable this learning is. I really want to see and understand the mind. And what are we particularly observing? How the mind plants seeds for stress, how the mind can plant seeds for release. Right now, planting seeds for stress or release. It's just subtle. And to the degree the mind does that, the first big payoff, like I said, we don't wait for 40 lifetimes before we get payoff. There's payoff that comes with joy. That's the next factor. Joy is that lightness, that absence of friction, that buoyancy that comes when the mind begins to unify. That unification means because of the persistence, the effort, all aspects of the heart and mind are really behind the mindfulness and investigation of how to be skillful, how not to do things, relate, pay attention in ways that cause things to get tight, how to relate in ways that loosen the screws. And when we get enough of that momentum, joy arises because of the unification, the coming together. Remember, I mentioned, like, even with the absence of the hindrances, there's some joy. It's a pretty wonderful state when the mind, like, check right now. Is there any ill will active in the mind, in the heart? Pushing something away? Is the mind caught with some kind of wanting to be home in bed actively? I mean, you may want to be home in bed, but is your mind actively wanting to be home in bed? Wanting to win the lottery? Is the mind indulging in sleepiness or restlessness, identified with it, spinning with doubt? So what is the mind that is relatively unhindered? And the Buddha described it as in these kind of potent ways. It's like having been ill, but now healthy again. Or having been imprisoned, having been enslaved by, oppressive forces, but no longer imprisoned, no longer enslaved. Having been in a dangerous place, but no longer in that dangerous place. So we have to, like, we know the toothaches. I don't know if people remember, Thich Nhat Hanh has this simple, useful instruction about we have to learn to notice the non-toothaches. We definitely notice our toothaches, but do we notice the non-toothaches? So, if your mind was really overrun right now with desire, you met somebody and you're just totally entranced by the person, or whatever it might be, you would notice, it would be obvious to you probably, I'm totally caught up, but it feels worth it, spinning. But when we're not like that, we haven't developed the capacity, we haven't trained ourselves to notice the absence of that lust, the absence of that hate, that absence of the dullness, the absence of the restlessness. And that's really useful, because that's how we get a better and better sense of what joy is. The absence of oppression in the mind. Do we notice that? Sometimes when it's really strong we do, or if we're prompted we do. But we want to get really just like when we have a vocabulary, I think I mentioned this a while back, for joy, we can start to notice it more, the different kinds of joy. The link I put for the people online, in case anybody came in again, I'll just, came in late, I'll put it one more time. And for those here in the room, I'll send it out in the next email. But it's just a page from Joseph Goldstein's book on mindfulness, the Satipatthana, that we've been studying these last, since the winter. We did body in the winter, and then mindfulness of feeling tone in the spring. Some of you were in that course, and mindfulness of mind in the summer. Now, mindfulness of mental qualities. Remember, this mindfulness is really about how we can affect the mind, by how we can abandon the hindrances and balance and develop the awakening factors, by how we pay attention. The first three is just like how to be mindful of the body, because we have so much baggage, so much projection that we have to tease out before we can even be aware of the body as it actually is. Same with feeling tone. We're so programmed to take feeling tone personally, as if it matters, each pleasant experience, each unpleasant. So we have to deprogram ourselves. And we did that in the spring with mindfulness of feeling tone. And mindfulness of mind is just realizing we can be aware of something relatively subtle, like how's the mind doing? What's the particular shape or texture? Is it an expansive mind or a constricted mind? Is it a greedy mind or a mind free of greed? So we're not trying to fix the mind, we're just trying to learn how to be aware of how the mind is. But in the fourth foundation, we're really trying, like, in how we pay attention and what we pay attention to, how to affect the quality of the mind. That's what we're doing with the fourth foundation. And part of what really helps is how to use joy. Because the first three, mindfulness, investigation, and this steadfastness, this persistence of energy, really, from a more ordinary point of view, are something that I do. And to a large degree, the other factors of awakening, there's 7 altogether, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, so the other 4 are kind of the natural, lawful unfolding of the first 3. So joy is like when we're steadfast enough, burning away inertia, burning away our habit energies to be superficial or to be flitting about, wandering here and there with our thoughts and attention, and we really persist, then the whole mind-body comes together, and that is experienced subjectively as joy. And so the handout, this one page from Joseph Goldstein's wonderful book on mindfulness, the 5 grades of rapture. So this is just from the tradition. And I'll go through this, but notice what your mind does with this, because I don't experience that. But I'm pretty sure people experience rapture. But what's really, I think, a kind of tragedy is we don't have a vocabulary to even be interested in it. Like, we don't know how to even be interested in joy. and the different gradations and the different causes for joy and what makes joy go away. Now you would think, as human beings who like joy by definition, that over the course of our life, the wise people in our life would have pulled us aside and said, you know what? You should become a really good student of joy. It's important because joy, happiness, is the proximate cause for concentration, a more powerful coming together of the heart and mind, more sensitivity, more clarity. And it's that samadhi, that coming together of heart and mind, that is the cause for insight. And it's insight that's the cause for release, letting go, putting down what can be put down. So this is not like a incidental part of spiritual the path. We really, everybody needs that happiness. I gave an example, I forget if it was for the Buddhist studies class not too long ago, of just the time, I think it was my first longer 3-month retreat at Insight Meditation Society. And I was in the middle, of the 3-month retreat. I've been practicing with a lot of sincerity, and I just remember on my way to the meditation hall, walking into the dining hall, and just the pleasure of seeing those, it wasn't everybody, but there was just a couple handful of people in the dining hall doing their walking meditation, and some people were sitting drinking tea. It was in the evening, and it was probably like one more sit, the later sit, that would go to 9:30 or something, 8:45 to 9:30 or something like that, and we were just about to begin that. And my heart just opened, just a kind of a natural, spontaneous feeling of belonging and feeling of love, which is pleasant. And the pleasure of that wholesome emotion of metta brought the mind into balance. It was like the missing ingredient. And the mind got really concentrated very quickly, right? And it was just an interesting experience of how, the mind had a lot of momentum, but it was a little out of balance. And this is often the case for us, that the missing ingredient in our lives and in our meditation is joy. And we think, well, God, there's no joy here. But it's much more likely that we don't know how to recognize the joy. And of course, joy develops when it's recognized. And so, I don't know if it was helpful, the instructions, but the 5th instruction in Mindfulness of Breathing is to train your heart, to train your mind, as you're breathing in, to experience joy. And then for whatever that duration of the exhalation is, can you keep joy in mind? And it doesn't help for you to say to yourself, there ain't any joy here, right? Because it's like even being interested in joy means the mind has to generate some sense of what joy is. Like to be looking for joy, you have to know what joy is. And the thing is about the mind, nama rupa, the body and mind, is that it's, we have this sort of fixation on materiality, but it's much more constructed universe than we can imagine. So if we're actually sincerely interested in joy, then it's like a wormhole. There's going to be some joy there. It may be faint, but then that's doubt. Like how to keep it in mind, how to keep the interest in mind. And just the more we do it, the more we'll have that sense. Like heaviness is not joy. Absence of heaviness may be joy. Being fixed, not joy. Flow may be joy. So we really get a sense of, because we know the opposite of joy so well. We're experts. So what is the diminishing of that? That's why I gave those similes that the Buddha uses for the abandoning of the hindrances. Like with greed, I think greed is likened to being in debt. No, some of you, I did, paid off our school loans. That felt nice, not to be in debt anymore, or you paid off a car or you paid off something. So there was that oppressive feeling of being in debt, and then it went away. Or some of you have gone backpacking, carrying your 40-pound backpack, and you stop for lunch, you take it off, and it's like you can jump. Have you noticed? It's like if you've worn it long enough, it's really a little trippy when you take it off. Your body feels different. Initially it feels different when you put it on, like, oh, this is not the body I know. But then it becomes normal after a number of hours, and you take it off, and you feel different. Same thing with the buzz of the refrigerator. After a while, you're not even oppressed by it. Initially, when it turns on, and you're sitting there, it's like, oh, God. But then it becomes the new normal. But then when it goes off, it's like, oh, the mind's not oppressed anymore. So, being out of debt, being sick and then no longer sick, these are really ways to get a sense of joy, because joy is more, and as it is often the case in how the Buddha taught and how it is for us just with our mind and body, the whole spiritual trip is much more about what's not there than what is there. Getting the golden chalice, I got it, the spiritual treasure. But it's more like shedding, abandoning. Remember, the image the Buddha uses for the whole path is the rotting of the riggings and sails of a boat, a ship that's been pulled up, dry dock, sitting in the rain and the sun, and over time, just the rotting away. You can think of the weather as sort of the illumination of wisdom and awareness, and it just wears away what's extra, not helpful. So, back to the 5 gradations, 5 grades of rapture. The Buddha spoke of 5 grades or level of rapture or joy. The first is called minor rapture. When this is present, there is a lifting of the spine. Right? That we all have that, like, whoa, you bought apple pie? It's like, we're going to go dancing? And the whole body shifts. We're kind of the drudgery at work, and then our best friend calls or sends us a text. I got tickets for, whatever, your favorite group. Are you free? And it's like, there's that lift, upliftment. This is minor rapture. Goosebumps, trembling of the body, that's all in the minor rapture. Second is called momentary rapture, which is felt as a sudden jolt of energy, like a flash of lightning. It might feel like when in an elevator wherein suddenly makes a short drop. At one point in my practice, Joseph writes, I was doing lying down meditation, and as a jolt of this momentary rapture became strong, I was suddenly thrust into an upright position. Yeah, and you see that sometimes if you're sitting with your eyes open, someone will get a little bolt of rapture and their body will just shift in a way. It's not always the case when people move, but sometimes. The third kind of piti, is the Pali word for rapture or joy, is called wave-like or showering rapture. This manifests as thrilling kinds of sensations coming over the body again and again, like waves lapping on the shore. Sometimes with each wave, the feeling of rapture becomes stronger and stronger. The fourth kind of rapture is uplifting rapture. When this kind of piti is present, it feels like the whole body has risen up into the air and is no longer touching the ground. If we're seated on a cushion, it's as if we are seated on a cushion of air and are floating up and down. Or sometimes when you're walking, everything is really spongy. It's like really light, floaty sort of feeling. There was a period of one of my retreats where it's like there wasn't any sort of normal physical sensations. It was just like a cool breeze, a really subtle, beautiful, cool breeze. That was the experience of the body. Even not just the meditation, just sort of sometimes moving around the meditation retreat center rather, for periods of time. And this is just when the mind has dropped these hindering tendencies. They're not uprooted, but they're far in the distance. This is what it's like to have a mind and body. See, we're so sure that the mind and body, like the wounds, the unfinished business, the bad stuff that happened to me, my terrible regrets, this bad knee I got, the fact that I haven't eaten good food in a while, I deserve to feel miserable, physically, emotionally, mentally. But then when we have some of these experiences of rapture and we learn to pay attention and see them in ordinary ways, like pay off our debt, and we're really curious of those, this is what that feels like. That something was oppressive and now it's not there. Can you notice that? Or you had a big project and you got it done, and there's that feeling of that's not weighing me down anymore. But we don't talk to our friends. Hey, we do a little bit, but we don't actually make it an object of awareness. Or what is that experience of no longer being oppressed by that big project I had to do? How does that exist in my subjective experience right now? And there's one more. The fifth kind of piti, or rapture, is called pervading rapture. Mahasi Sayadaw, so he's one of the most influential monks of the last century in Burma, described it this way, quote, "A sublime feeling of happiness and exhilaration filling the whole body with an exceedingly sweet and subtle thrill." And of course, it makes sense that when we have an experience of rapture, so much of the activity of our mind is trying to feel good. So when we feel really good, all of that endless activity of my mind to look for a good feeling can go offline because I got a good feeling. So it removes ill will from the mind when we have some joy, and it really sets up this sweeter, more settled sukha, or ease, the ease of contentedness, which leads to tranquility, which is the next factor of awakening. So next week I'll start talking about the last 2 weeks, the tranquilizing factors of tranquility, and to really get that kind of pervading sense of being settled, of body and mind, happiness of body and mind. Don't really need to go anywhere. Now we know this in a grosser level, like if you've ever had a really good massage, or you did the sauna, Minnesota sauna thing, and then you jumped in cold water, and then you did the sauna again, and then you jumped in cold water, and then you were sitting, drinking a nice beverage of your preference, and you had that, I feel really good, I don't need to do or go anywhere. That pervading sense of happiness of body and mind. That's tranquility. That's the beginning of tranquility. It's really that it's characterized by, I don't need to move my body, and I don't need to move my mind to like this or to that, because there's a lot of contentment with the bodily and mental experience right now. So there's that absence of movement, so we generally call that feeling really settled. really tranquil. And you might even be able to sense some degree of that tranquility right now. The mind and body happy, content with here and now. And this, like I said, these last four of joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, they kind of just naturally follow. If we really emphasize as a practitioner what does it mean to be mindful, to keep the present moment in mind, so that that wisdom aspect of investigation can learn a thing or two that it hasn't learned yet about what it is to be skillful and what it is to be unskillful, so that effort can get activated, that inspired, like, oh, there's something to do in the present moment. There's some learning that would be good to learn. And then that, when there's enough momentum of that, joy arises. And it's really helpful because of it's like the opposite of a panic attack. There's a feedback mechanism. Being aware of joy is joyful. So it really feeds back on itself. So we want to know, we want to remember to be interested in joy and tranquility and stillness and equanimity. And, what we'll talk about next week, in terms of these first four of mindfulness, investigation, energy, and joy, is like, how do we feed them? I'll just share from one of the suttas, the discourse, the Buddha talks about there are mental qualities that act as a foothold for mindfulness, for investigation, for energy, for joy, right? There are mental qualities that act as a foothold for these factors of awakening to foster appropriate or inappropriate attention to them, right? Appropriate attention leads to the feeding. Not paying attention or paying attention in an inappropriate way, like a dismissive way, will lead to it not developing. So what do we have to pay attention to grow, to develop mindfulness? And one of the things that's talked about in the tradition is the absence of remorse. Like really noticing that my relationships with other people are harmonious. So I really have the privilege to turn inward, to be in the present moment, because I didn't leave a mess over here or a mess over there, or that person isn't seeking revenge on me because I screwed them. I've been careful, I've been full of care in how I've been living my life, so when I've got some time to sit, I'm not haunted by all the messes that I've left unfinished, unaddressed. So that freedom from remorse, or they call it in the tradition the bliss of blamelessness, really is one of the causes. And to know that, like, oh yeah, it's sort of like I have earned the right to be just with my experience. The kids are put to bed, or they're grown-ups, living their own life, did my best as a parent, wash the dishes, or whatever, I can sit. So we're not haunted by anything. The proximate cause for investigation is what I've been talking about, realizing there are relatively skillful and unskillful ways for the mind to be showing up in this moment, and it really behooves me to know that, what's skillful and unskillful. It's kind of like if we're in a place where there's a lot of danger, and over the course of our lifetime we've made a lot of terrible mistakes, It's like, it's really good to know, yeah, don't do that, don't touch this, don't mix those two things, and we know how to be in this place. So what's blameworthy, what's blameless, what's gross, what's refined, what contributes to ignorance, getting obsessive, getting lost in thought, what supports the continuity of awareness. To what do we pay attention to strengthen energy? We keep in mind the value, like that there is something to do with my energy. There's something that can be gotten through this persistence. It's like when you're gardening and you're weeding, it's like, yeah, if I keep watering, I keep weeding, there are going to be nice tomatoes. That inspires us. Or I keep playing this, practicing, I'm going to get good at this song. So that just it's sort of keeping in mind the lawfulness of the universe. When the mind applies itself in this way, in this skillful way, from what it's learned from the investigation, good stuff happens. And then in the tradition, the way we feed rapture, mental qualities that act as a foothold for rapture. So basically, keeping rapture in mind, which is that fifth instruction with mindfulness of breathing. One trains oneself breathing in, experiencing joy. One trains oneself while breathing out, experiencing joy. And I really encourage people to experiment by using the word, or use that whole phrase even periodically. Just what the Buddha said. Training myself, breathing in, experiencing joy. And you can shorten it then to experiencing joy as you're breathing out. Experiencing joy, breathing in. And it's like the words, for one, will support the concentration because it takes effort to repeat that phrase. Or just even the word joy you can use when the mind's more settled and it doesn't need sort of the bigger instrument. But it's like the word, even the word joy, it's used to point the attention toward the experience. It's not enough to repeat the word joy as you breathe in and then as you breathe out, but really aiming. And so for all four of these, really get good at strengthening mindfulness, that quality of investigation, that steadfastness of effort, and noticing joy and keeping it in mind. And if you can't do the subtle, go back, because it's like you can always go back to mindfulness. And if in your trying to figure out what mindfulness is, you're obsessed by all the messes in your life, well, maybe stop meditating and clean up some of the messes in your life, so when you get another chance to sit, you won't be haunted. Because, if I've been bad all day and not done what I'm supposed to do, it's probably not going to work for me to go meditate later in the day. It might be better to take a couple weeks or even a couple years as best I can and clean up my life. Because taking care of that business of living in harmony, taking care of our responsibilities, making amends when we've caused harm, that you can't avoid that work. You can't meditate that away. I'll just end with this, and then we'll have a little time for a few comments or questions. This is a really famous example from the tradition about just how the path unfolds. This is one of the most famous, or probably the most famous female supporter of the Buddha, nun. She was a lay woman. And she once asked the Buddha if she could have permission to give the nuns and monks some things to help them in their lives. Like when somebody is staying back to take care of a sick nun, they can't go out and collect their meal. She was wondering if she could bring food for the people that are caretaking the sick, monks and nuns, so they don't have to go collect their food. And could I give them bathing cloths so when they're bathing in the river, they don't have to be naked, they can have sort of a smock or something around them and scrub themselves down without being immodest or something like that. So anyway, the Buddha said yes, but he asked why. And of course, the Buddha was intuitive and he knew that she would have something really wonderful to say. This is what Visakha said. When I remember my acts of generosity, I shall be glad. When I am glad, joyful, I will be happy. That's that contentedness. When my mind is happy, my body will be tranquil. That's settledness. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. I shall feel that pleasure. When I feel the pleasure, my mind will become steady and still. That will bring the development of the spiritual faculties, faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, the spiritual powers, and the factors of awakening in me. Because awakening can't be stopped when everything comes into balance like that. The mind, the heart, opens to what it needs to see and open to. It isn't waiting for you or me to do the right thing. It's waiting for that beautiful balance. Then everything opens up.